First, it was The Secret, introducing us to the law of attraction. Because of the amount of people that were exposed to it, we can say that this was the first dot that appeared. For a lot of us, it's where the journey began. After that, What the Bleep explored the world of quantum physics, providing a scientific explanation to the role of consciousness. As a result, the world's understanding as a whole expanded. Soon after that, Zeitgeist the movie pushes collective consciousness one step further, especially relating to the monetary system and the government's ability to create money out of thin air. These are all points in time where the world's understanding as a whole expanded. The collective consciousness became aware of new things, and were put in a position where they had to decide between what they believed and the new information that was being presented. And so for a lot of people, it became a matter of turning inward, to distinguish between information that resonated as truth from that which didn't, often forcing them to accept a picture very different from the mainstream beliefs of the world. And while there are countless other YouTube videos and websites that have assisted in the evolution of consciousness, the point I'm trying to make here is there's a group of us, all learning together. And we might be at different points within the same journey, taking in information from a variety of sources. But in the end, it all seems to be pointing in the same direction, as if we're being called towards the inevitable understanding of who we really are. And so this idea of collective consciousness expanding overnight as a result of being exposed to new information gives you just a glimpse of what it would be like if the curtain was really pulled back for everyone to see.
I'm going to talk about consciousness today, and this is the profound mystery of our existence. We talk about it all the time. We know about it through our experiences, but actually nobody agrees about consciousness. And you probably know that it's entirely individual, that we have looked and we have no agreement whatsoever in science, in philosophy, in mysticism, of what it is and how we get there. So here we are in this quandary with no criteria for judging consciousness, and science is trying to do it now by doing brain waves and by doing patterns in brain waves. And they're getting a little ways, but not very far. And the reason they aren't getting very far is because this is so linear way of looking at things when consciousness is so nonlinear. But each one of us has this consciousness, and it's an awareness that makes us pay attention to things. And where'd we get it? How did we come to it? Well, we came to it in what we call certain kinds of altered states. And most of us have had altered states when we daydream, and we go into a place where it's different than where we've been. But actually, we've studied these altered states in like multiple personalities. And a multiple personality goes from one extreme state to another extreme state and can't seem to change the difference. And so we've said there are two kinds of consciousness. And then we've done it in when we say we're unconscious. People who are in comas are unconscious, supposedly. Did you realize that there's no such thing as unconsciousness? We're always conscious.
Continue to relax now. Continue your breathing. Notice your thinking pattern. Notice your environment. Here in the Monroe Institute laboratory, we work with people in an isolation booth to teach them how to move into different states of consciousness, to increase intuition, creative thought, to explore the realms of their own hypnagogic imagery. We provide them with a combination of sound patterns to help shape their brain waves into conducive states of consciousness. Raw brainwave patterns look very similar to what you might see on a polygraph machine. In this case, we simply turn those pages into a map of the brain. We can do that simply by asking for a different type of computer display. Here we've taken that same information and turned it into a map. This oval pattern represents the top of the head of the individual. This oval pertains to alpha waves, this one to theta waves, and this one over here to delta. We can move forward second by second here in time and see the brainwave patterns change. Breaking up of the alpha, moving a little bit better in here. And there's a nice theta picture. The alpha, resting state alpha, is broken down altogether. When we have a nice clear and synchronous theta pattern, it's kind of an intuitive situation. You see this kind of happen, we would like to train the individual to recognize consciously when this happens by teaching people how to feel this intuitive sense. It can become part of one of the things that you know how to do. Now you can prolong that. It doesn't have to be just an intuitive flash, but you can learn to explore your intuitive knowledge simply by expanding that intuitive insight to take not just a couple of seconds, but a few minutes of your own in-depth exploration. It can be a very different kind of a world. Not the same physical world we live in, but a mental world, a mental dimension in and of itself, filled with answers and understanding.
The Earth's resonant frequency starts at 7.83 Hertz and ends with the 7th harmonic at 43.2 Hertz, correlating with the 7 chakras. Ultimately, the greatest discovery of our Earth is its consciousness. A visible attribute of consciousness is an energetic field that governs the shaping of organisms. Morphogenesis is a scientific term to explain this very shaping of tissues, organs, and entire organisms. Consciousness is the creative force of the entire universe. It has been given many names such as God, Yahweh, Krishna, nature, the field, and divinity. The entire universe is in fact a single living, conscious organism with complete awareness of itself. The reason why it may seem difficult to comprehend this is because our understanding is typically limited by our language. When we hear the term conscious organism, we tend to anthropomorphize its definition. By giving it human qualities, we mistakenly look past what an organism truly is in the first place. The definition of an organism is any living thing capable of response to stimuli, reproduction, growth and development, and maintenance of homeostasis as a stable whole. Our universe does all of these things. The consciousness of our universe is responsible for the form and purpose that all matter assumes. The Earth's resonant frequencies are a result of its form. These frequencies are responsible for biological rhythms, such as menstrual and circadian cycles, as well as behavioral and emotional patterns. The frequencies are then picked up by the flora and fauna, which are biological instruments that respond to the wave patterns. The wave patterns resonate in the cranial structure of our head and converge in the center of our brain, which is where we find the pineal gland. The pineal gland is believed in many cultures to be the spiritual third eye responsible for intuition. Descartes called it the seat of the soul where mind and body meet. Each individual cell in our body receives an electromagnetic impulse from our central nervous system. They receive the very same impulse that was disseminated to every biological instrument from the earth. An explanation of our conscious universe has been attempted by religion, science, and philosophy. The neglect of biological nature from any organism causes illness. a divorce from nature, exile from Eden, confounding of tongues. They are all symptoms, not of a biblical God or deity, but the true self. The greatest and only threat to ourselves is a loss of self, the death of our divinity.
I'd like to talk to you here about biocentrism, which is a new theory of everything which arrives at the same conclusions as non-duality. So every now and then a very simple but radical idea shakes the foundations of knowledge. So when the discovery of the earth, that it wasn't flat, challenged the way people perceived themselves and their relationship with the surroundings. Our ancestors were challenged to believe that the earth was round, even though the ground they walked on was flat. And nothing in everyday experience revealed anything about the truth of this idea. So if the earth was really round, it was argued that people at the bottom would fall off. So it was considered complete nonsense 500 years ago. So likewise, biocentrism is turning the world upside down again, with the seemingly simple idea that the universe arises from life, not the other way around. So switching the perspective of the universe from physics to biology undoes everything we know about the universe and life in it. We think that life is just an accident of physics, but a long list of experiments suggests exactly the opposite. Amazingly, if you add life and consciousness to the equation, you can explain some of the biggest puzzles in science. For instance, it becomes clear why space and time, indeed the properties of matter themselves, depend on the observer. It also becomes clear why the laws of the universe itself are fine-tuned for the existence of life. So until we recognize the universe in our head, attempts to understand the world remain a road to nowhere. So scientists fail to recognize those properties of life that make it critical for our existence. So the view of the world in which life and consciousness are bottom line to understanding the larger universe is called biocentrism. And it revolves around the way our consciousness relates to a physical process. It's a vast mystery that I've pursued my entire life with a lot of help along the way. So I've come to conclusions that would shock many of my colleagues and predecessors, placing biology above the other sciences, in particular physics and chemistry, in an attempt to understand a theory of everything that has eluded these other disciplines. We're taught since childhood that the universe is divided into two entities, ourselves and that which is outside of us. So this seems logical. Self is commonly defined by that we can control. So I can move my fingers, but I can't wiggle your toes. The dichotomy then is based largely on control and manipulation. So the basic biology, however, tells us that we don't control most of the trillions of cells in the body any more than we do control a rock or a tree. So consider everything around you right now, me up here at the podium, your hands, your body. Language and custom all say that that's outside us in the external world. But you can't see anything through the vault of bone surrounding your brain. Everything you see and experience right now, your body, the walls, the ceilings of this room, are an active process that's occurring in your mind. You are this process. You're not just the part that you control. So your eyes just aren't portals to the world. You think you just see out there, but again, you can't see through the cranium. So what you're seeing, again, is everything that you think right there is out there is actually a construction happening moment to moment in your mind. So again, I want to emphasize that this is all happening in your head, and even the light from the bulbs in this room, they're moving through a space that's actually created in your mind. So consider everyday reality. So for instance, the weather outside. You see a blue sky out there, but the cells in your brain could be changed so that everything that's blue looks green or red. Could even do a little genetic engineering so that everything that's red makes a noise or vibrates or makes you want to have sex like some birds. Or for instance, you think it's bright out, the circuits in your brain could be changed so that it's dark. You think it's hot and humid, but to a tropical frog it would look cold and dry. So this logic applies to virtually everything. Bottom line is, and the first principle of biocentrism is that reality involves your consciousness. It could not be there without your consciousness. Emerson once said, "We have learned that we do not see directly, but mediately, and that we have no means for correcting the colored and distorted lenses which we are, or of computing the amount of their errors. Perhaps these subjective lenses have a creative power. Perhaps there are no objects." So why is everyone surprised at the experimental findings of quantum theory? It's because we're still operating in a severely outdated paradigm. We still believe there's an external world that exists independent of the perceiving subject. So philosophers and physicists from Plato to Hawking have debated this. Niels Bohr, the great Nobel physicist, once said, "Not so. When we're measuring something, we're forcing an undetermined, undefined world to assume an experimental value. We're not measuring the world, we're creating it." And this is from a physicist. And at the legendary debates, Einstein presented ingenious ideas supporting the idea of a real world out there. But Bohr shot every one of them down one by one and gradually convinced his colleagues of his point of view. Today, however, most people still believe there's an external world out there. This issue, of course, is ancient and predates biocentrism, which of course explains why one view and not the other has to be correct. So let's consider a little of the physics, the real experiments. Consider the famous two-hole experiment. When scientists watch a particle go through two holes in the barrier, it acts like a little bullet and logically goes through one hole or the other. But if you don't watch it, it behaves like a wave and can go through both holes at the same time. So why should a particle out there change its behavior depending on whether you watch it or not? And of course, the answer is that reality is a process that involves your consciousness. And again, there have been many, many versions of that experiment. Consider Heisenberg's famous uncertainty principle. If there was really a world out there with particles just bouncing around, then we should certainly be able to measure all of their properties. But you can't. So for instance, a particle's exact location and its momentum can't be known at the same time. So why should it matter to matter or to particles what you decide to measure? Again, the answer is simple. The particles aren't just out there. Again, we can go on and on. One more, entangled particles you've probably heard of. How can particles possibly instantaneously be connected at opposite sides of the galaxy out there in violation of the speed of light? Again, they're not just out there. Space and time are tools of our mind. They're forms of animal understanding. So this is the problem, in a nutshell, is that we look at the world like a chipmunk or a squirrel. The squirrel opens his eyes and sees the acorn, and it's just miraculously there. He grabs it and he scurries up the tree without any further thought. And we humans are the same. We wake up in the morning and the world is just magically there. We go through life, we drool, completely oblivious to what's going on around us in the world. But experiment after experiment shows that not a single particle out there exists with real properties until it's observed. So it doesn't take a genius to realize that reality is a process, again, that involves consciousness. So what we need to do is replace the old physics with a new biology. Space and time aren't these hard, cold objects out there, sort of like the pebbles and the shells you pick up along the seashore. No, wave your hand through the air. If you take everything away, what's left? Nothing. And the same thing is for time. You can't put it in a bottle like milk. So again, all of experience is just information that's occurring inside your mind, and space and time are the mind's tools for putting it all together. We even do it in dreams. With your eyes closed, you can be on the beach with bright lights just as real as we are here in this room. Your mind has the ability to create space and time just like it does in dreams. And in schizophrenics, anyone who may be a doctor realizes that those patients see people right beside them in reality just like this, just as real as you and I right now. But that's just part of the equation. Again, you have to look at what's going on in science, not just with the experiments, but in terms of observation. So it turns out that biocentrism may be the only rational way to explain the structure of the universe itself. So the cosmos, it turns out, has a long list of traits that make it appear as if everything was exactly tailor-made just for us. And some are calling this the Goldilocks principles, after the old nursery tale of the three bears who try different bowls of porridge. Some of the bowls are too hot, some are too cold. And the bears also try different chairs and beds. And each time the third bear finds that everything is just right. So likewise, the cosmos has an incredibly unlikely list of traits that make it not to this, not to that, for life to exist. So for instance, the Big Bang, if it was 1 part in a millionth more powerful, it would have rushed out too fast for galaxies and worlds to be here. Again, the result, no us. If the strong nuclear force would decrease by 2%, atomic nuclei would not hold together. Plain vanilla hydrogen would be the only element in the universe. Again, if the gravitational constant were decreased just a hair, stars, including the sun, wouldn't ignite. There are over 200 parameters so exact. These could be any number, anything, but they're exactly just right for life to exist. And so, again, if you tweak any of them, you never existed. So none of these are predicted by any theories, and they all seem exactly carefully to allow for life. And of course, it's been hijacked by intelligent design folks, but it doesn't mitigate the problem of why these constants are all exactly one way when they could be millions of other parameters. So one way is to say God did it, and the only scientific explanation is something called the so-called anthropic principle, which says that we must find these conditions because if we're alive, what else could we find? Well, of course, that really isn't an explanation. That's unless you say there are an infinite number of universes, and we just happen to live in the one lucky one where all the parameters, all the parameters are exactly right. And again, just one in a gazillion. Certainly we can do better than that. So obviously no universe that would allow for life could possibly exist from a biocentric point of view. The universe and all of its parameters simply reflect the spatial temporal logic of the animal observer. So it turns out the long sought after theory of everything is really just merely missing one important component that was too close to us to have noticed. So some of the thrill that came with the announcement of the human genome had been mapped, or that we're understanding the Big Bang. It rests in our desire for completeness and totality. So these comprehensive theories, all of them, feel right now to take into account one critical factor, and that is that we're creating them. We're the biological creature that fashions the stories, that makes the observations, and it gives names to things. And therein lies the great expanse of our errors. And that is that science hasn't confronted the one thing that's most familiar and most mysterious, and that is, of course, consciousness.